Kentucky Derby preps on the East and West Coast. We take a look back at the Holy Bull at Gulfstream. We go out west to Santa Anita and check in on the Robert Lewis Stakes. We also take a look at the fillies this week on the Future Book. Recap of the weekend stakes races starting in Florida. Want to kind of dissect the Holy Bull Stakes, and this was an interesting race. Prime Factor took all the early money. He opened up at 3 to 5 on the tote board, and you could get almost 3 to 1 on Greatest Honor. And then, you know, the other horses kind of floated up a little bit. You had Sitting on a Go. He didn't get a lot of play. Amount did not get any play after his maiden win, so you kind of got the feeling that the sheets and the numbers were pretty much leaning to two horses, either Greatest Honor or Prime Factor. And the race kind of developed a little bit interestingly. You had a couple of horses going to the lead, and Prime Factor had to sit that 3-wide trip just off the pace. Now, he did get some horses to chase, but I think that was a rough trip in his second lifetime start, especially on the stretch out from 6 furlongs to 1 mile and a 16th. Meanwhile, I think Greatest Honor had developed a little bit of a reputation of being this closer, and he was only a couple of lengths behind Prime Factor. So there was never any separation, and when Prime Factor was finally able to make his move going into the turn, only a length behind him was Greatest Honor, and with those extra 3 races on his career, he was just in better shape, really went to the leaders and went right on by them. Once they got down the stretch, it was really just a matter of how much and how far for Greatest Honor. Now, Tarantino making the move to the dirt surface, ran well, ran on late as Prime Factor kind of faded. Prime Factor, a little bit of the shine off the rose. Interesting race. You know, I don't think he had the best of trips. You know, the one thing is when you get these bigger fields on the East Coast, it seems like you get a little bit more of that speed injected in there, whereas the smaller fields on the West Coast, you don't get some of that speed that isn't as true. So I think Prime Factor probably would have been dealt a better hand if he'd have been on the lead in this race. He just couldn't secure it right away with the other horses that were entered in this race. So early on, it looks like next out for Greatest Honor could possibly be the Fountain of Youth. I think they're going to skip that and point for the Florida Derby. Just horses run a lot less now. Now, of course, this year they don't have the Lasix, so he could come back in that Fountain of Youth. But he's got the conditioning. He had a 4-race campaign as a 2-year-old. I think he's got what he needs for stamina building, and they can really gear up towards that Florida Derby and then point to the Kentucky Derby. Prime Factor, we could see him possibly maybe going to the Wood Memorial, maybe staying right there in Florida and just pointing for the Florida Derby and putting all his eggs in that basket. I think he's a nice horse. I think he just got out-conditioned in this spot. Tarantino, I think we probably saw the best he has to offer in these distance, classier races. He could be a turf horse. He could maybe be a grade 2, grade 3 horse on the dirt in a small enough field. I'm not sure he really wants that 1 1/8 too often in his career. Now, on the West Coast, we saw the Robert Lewis played out a little bit different way. We had Medina Spirit as the favorite, even money, 6 to 5, most of the betting. He parlayed that on an inside trip, was sent to the lead, set an opening fast quarter, and he was challenged. He was challenged from wipe to slate. Spielberg rated back in 4th place, but Parnelli tried to make a little bit of a run at the half-mile pole. He flattened out quickly, and then coming up into the turn, you had Roman Centurion, and then along with Hot Rod Charlie. Those 3 battled the entire length of the stretch, and Medina Spirit, have to give it to him. He did never relinquish the lead, changed leads late, and was able to prevail on a long drive. Now, the buyer figures are in, an 89 for Greatest Honor, a 91 for Medina Spirit. They gave actually all 3 horses in the Lewis Stakes a 91. I thought it was a gutsy effort. Now, the one thing you have to determine whenever it's a blanket finish like that, sometimes people like to put that race down a notch because in the higher class races, they tend to spread out the field a little bit more. So you had 3 horses under the line, all with a 91. I think Medina Spirit in his 3rd lifetime race showed a couple of good qualities. He dug in, he set a fast opening quarter and then relaxed off that. I don't think he's a need to lead type. Hot Rod Charlie, off to the long layoff, proved that he could compete with these horses. You know, he was 95-1 in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. You always question that. And then also, you know, Roman Centurion, he's put a lot of 3 good efforts in a row now, starting off his career, ran against Life is Good. Then he went up and broke his maiden, and that one came back a slow time, but he kind of went up in class and increased his speed figure in this race. So that's a nice pattern for Roman Centurion. We'll see them probably in a mismatch of the races out West Coast. With Life is Good pointing for the San Felipe, possibility maybe we'll see if Medina Spirit waits until the Santa Anita Derby or ships out of town. And then the same thing with Roman Centurion. So an interesting Robert Lewis, 91, the Brisnet speed figure. Zagiel won the Forward Gale on the Oak side for Todd Pletcher. Long drive, had a little bit of eventful trip, second lifetime start again. Going into that second lifetime race, always a little bit more of an acid test from the class rise. And then also interesting, taking a look at the Martha Washington, an 8-1 shot in that race. A nice victory for Will's Secret, came from off the pace, kind of a fast pace in that race, a little bit of an off track at Oaklawn Park, and we'll see where they continue on down the road in the next leg of the Oaklawn race for the fillies. That's your race recap on the Future Book. The Future Book continues, and since we had pool number 2 of the Kentucky Derby Future Wager last week, wanted to take a look at some of the top contenders. For those of you who have been following the channel for a while, one of the things I like to do is take a look at the pattern of their speed figures, what type of speed figure number they debut at, and again, it's not so much which speed figure you're using, whether it's Bayer or Brisnet or Equibase or whatever. What you're trying to see is how their pattern of development is shaping up so that they can actually peak the first Saturday in May, because for the most part, the Kentucky Derby and Triple Crown races, these horses are primed to put a career top effort in those races. So now how you read this is Brisnet speed numbers, and the start number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is how these horses have done in that career start number. So Life is Good debuted with a 100 Brisnet. And in his second start in the Sham, he regressed to a 98. Now that's good. Normally you don't see a lot of regression. In fact, a lot of these horses improve in that second and third start. And for me, that third start is always that lifetime cycle. If a horse isn't up into the upper 80s by that third lifetime start, a lot of times that development just never really happens. So a horse like Jackie's Warrior, he got there in his second lifetime start. He got a 97. And then he reeled off 3 straight 90s and even 101 in his 2-year-old season. And then he finished his campaign with a 97 in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So he didn't really regress that much. Now, I think people still have some reservations whether he can go a mile and an eighth, a mile and a quarter in top company. But his speed figure pattern is sitting on that he can probably come back and second off a layoff have a new career top if he can do it at a longer distance. Now, Caddo River, not only is he improving that third lifetime start, he got a 94, it was off a layoff, and he had a little bit of time to consolidate those gains. So he's sitting on a perfect pattern. Next up for him is going to be the Rebel Stakes. And then you've got a horse like Essential Quality, who finished his 2-year-old campaign with a 101, but 3 straight races improving, 2 straight races improving off his debut effort. So Essential Quality with a nice pattern on the speed figures. And even a horse like Capo Cane, even though he drew off in his most recent race and he's going to come up here in the Withers, an 87, he needs to get to that lower 90s, but his speed figure improvement pattern is a solid pattern. Whereas a horse like Midnight Bourbon, it took him 5 races to get to that career top of 95. I'm just not sure how much more improvement a horse like Midnight Bourbon can make. Now, the second thing I always look at is the number of days away. Now, many of these horses haven't started too often, but like Jackie's Worry, he had 49 days between that first start and that second start. And what you start to see is, you know, even Caddo River, a 36-day layoff, a 35-day layoff. And so he's going to come into a Withers with, again, another 30-plus days off. and he should really be able to keep on firing a strong speed figure. Senior Buscador, he had 42 days off between his first start and second start. So that'll be interesting to see if he stays on that type of pattern. You know, throughout the years, we're seeing more horses, you know, they can replicate those top performances when they have 35 to 40 days. But normally somewhere in that pattern, you want to see that 25 to 30 day. That's really when they can leap forward, if they can kind of condense their improvements into a 25 to 30 day on that speed figure days away. Spielberg, you notice they kind of threw him into the deep waters a couple of times, 19 days and 14 days between starts, and that's why you're going to see him go up and down, probably most likely, in his speed figures. You know, again, it's also a sign they really didn't have a plan with him. They were just kind of throwing him into races, trying to get wins, and they kind of threw him overboard in that grade 1, and then they had to come back and get that maiden victory. So it'll be interesting to see what he does in the Robert Lewis, and moving forward, how Spielberg is kind of where he ranks in the Barnes pecking order. So that's your days away and speed figure development for some of the top contenders here on the Future Book. Big weekend of stakes racing coming up. Las Virginia Stakes for the fillies. We've got the Withers Stakes at the Big A, Aqueduct. Capo Cane going to try to win that race. And going to be probably a small field, 6 to 7 horses in the Withers expected. And down at Tampa, it's the Sam F. Davis. And we'll see how that race shakes out. We'll recap it all next week on the Future Book. And we'll have previews of the Withers and the Sam F. Davis this week. Make sure to subscribe so you can watch those previews. And remember, people have opinions. As D. Wayne Lucas says, horses have the facts.